Good morning, guys, and for the final video of Zakupalooza, celebrating 500 subs on this channel, thank you for that, by the way, is going to be a bit of an oddball here. We have the mass production Zaku II and Big Gun set from Gundam Thunderbolt here. This is a 2016 standard release that I got for $46, which is pretty expensive for a high grade. That's master grade territory levels of price there. Like, you can get any of the wing master grades for that price. You can get the master grade Jesta, the Gym Sniper 2. I think you can get the master grade Jagan for around that price as well. But anyway, that's just to say that this is a very expensive high grade. It's more expensive than something like the high grade Calrea, which is a very expensive high grade in its own right. But that is for, I think, good reason, because of course this isn't just a Zaku II, it is the Big Gun, which hopefully lives up to his name. It is quite large. The only real thing I know about this kit that I've heard of previously, this was a while ago, so forgive me if I'm misremembering, is that the Big Gun is like horrifically color inaccurate. So hopefully I'm just misremembering that isn't the case, but we will see once this kit is built. So of course, getting right into it here, we have this box art here, this very dramatic shot with the Zaku II on the Big Gun here, with this very kind of stark lighting in front of it. Looks like it's getting flashed. You see a bunch of like smoke coming off the Big Gun, so presumably it has just fired it or something like that. And of course you have all these thunderbolts and stuff going in the background because, of course, Thunderbolt sector, lots of like lightning storms and stuff over there. On the bottom here, we will of course get the full painted build here of the Zaku II on the Big Gun. And yeah, the Big Gun does look like it's going to be, well, quite large compared to the Zaku II here. And then of course you get a, I'm not sure if this is like a diorama shot or a CG render or something of the Zaku II firing the Big Gun up here in the top left. You get a rear shot of the Zaku II and the Big Gun down at the bottom left, and then on the right here you will get some advertisement for the Mobile Suit Gundam Thunderbolt anime. On the other side here we have another shot of the full painted build of the Zaku II and Big Gun, and of course showing off the Zaku II with all the accessories it comes with. And it looks like, despite this like clearly being intended to be used with the Big Gun, the Zaku II is going to come with a full suite of accessories that does mean that it should have no problem being posed separately if you want to have another kit mounted on the Big Gun. So, getting right into it. Inside the box we get 7 bags of runners, and you probably saw it in the unboxing, but I did spot something I was not expecting to see in any kind of modern high grade, but we'll get to that in a bit. Before that then, we have this manual, which is going to be a standard style Gundam Thunderbolt high grade manual. Going to show another different angle of the Zaku II mounting the Big Gun here. I believe this is going to be the full painted build. No specs or anything on the front here like you would see on normal HGUC manuals or anything like that. But, oh, I didn't even notice because I was just holding the two at the same time. This is going to be a combination. You get 2 manuals in the box. You get the Big Gun itself, and you get the Zaku II Thunderbolt version. So we'll take a look at the Zaku II first, of course. On the inside here, you get some more advertisement of Gundam Thunderbolt and showing off and talking about the development of the Zaku II. Of course, this is all going to be in Japanese because this was before Bandai has discovered that the West likes Gunpla. Of course, you get the full painted build of the Zaku II here, showing off its arsenal. You get the Zaku Bazooka, Zaku Machine Gun, you see some propellant tanks on the back, you see a Heat Hawk, etc. This very like insane over-the-top backpack that's very characteristic of Thunderbolt. And then here, well, I guess this is the back of the manual, but you have the weapons build here for the Zaku Machine Gun, Zaku Bazooka, Heat Hawk, etc. And then on the back of the manual, you will of course get your decal marking guide, which is not going to look the greatest because the green Zaku's color scheme is a little bit dark, so the borders of these sticker-style decals are going to be pretty apparent, especially ones like this small Xeon logo here in the dark gray section of the chest. But getting into the build then, in terms of parts count, this looks like it is going to be a fairly simple Zaku II, and the build, starting with the torso, of course, looks like it's going to be very, like, slightly older HGUC style. It's going to have pretty minimal inner frame. It's going to rely heavily on polycaps, which shouldn't be that huge of an issue. I do have some concerns with the rather large backpack of the Zaku II Thunderbolt version, but we will see. Then you get into the waist, which is a little bit odd, talking about bending the power piping so it looks natural. Oh, it does look like the torso is going to be a bit smaller than a lot of other Zaku IIs, and the waist is going to be a bit larger. And then you kind of build the two as like one big unit for all the power piping. Then you have your rather large backpack there, and you see there are already a ton of color correcting stickers being used on the backpack. So a little bit unfortunate there that it does require so many color correcting stickers, but it is what it is. Then you get into your head here, pretty typical high-grade Zaku stuff. And then you get into your arms. Again, looks pretty typical, lots of hollow spaces, but that is to be expected. There is going to be a bunch of texturing here to replicate the, I guess, blast bag covering that all of the Gundam Thunderbolt suits have, because again, Thunderbolt sector, they have to isolate the frame from the insane electrical storms that are happening there at all times. Then, of course, on the right shoulder, you're going to have your Zaku shoulder shield. Left shoulder, you're going to have your spike shoulder. Very typical stuff. And then you get into your feet. Again, pretty average high-grade Zaku. This does look like it's going to be pretty similar to something like the high-grade Zaku II F2, if you ever built that kit. From what I remember, because I built that kit a long time ago, but this is going to, the legs in particular, are going to be pretty similar to that. Then, of course, you assemble the full kit, and then you attach the propellant tank onto the backpack there. And then you get into the weapons I showed off earlier. So the Zaku itself looks like it's going to be fairly simple, but let's take a look at the star of the show here, the big gun. On the back, you're going to be getting your decal marking guide here of the big gun itself. Not really much to say. Most of it's going to be stripes or text. On the inside here, some advertisement for Gundam Thunderbolt, talking about the development of the big gun, and then here a full image of the painted build of the Zaku II mounting the big gun. Of course, the Zaku II is going to be floating there because, again, Thunderbolt takes place in space. The Zaku II would have no problem just kind of floating there, mounting the big gun. So here we have the parts list for the big gun. It doesn't look like it's going to be all that complex. Look, in very high-grade fashion, this is going to be a fairly simple build, and there's the thing that I was not expecting to see in a modern high grade. The big gun uses screws for the articulation of the legs. I get that they're rather large and I guess would need some extra reinforcement, but screws in a modern high grade is not something I was expecting to see. You can let me know in the comments if any other modern high grades use screws other than the big gun here, because I have never seen it in any modern high grade. And then of course you get into assembling the rest of the kit here, then assembling the barrels and stuff, and then mounting the big gun onto the large tripod that looks like it's going to be the majority of the build. And then on the other side here, talking about mounting the magazines for the big gun, and then mounting the Zaku II onto the big gun. So looks like it's going to be fairly simple. Again, I'm interested to see how color accurate this is, because I'd heard it was pretty bad, and to see how these screws hold up on this kit. But getting into the contents of the bags. So inside the bags, we get 16 runners, which sounds like a lot, but again, you're essentially building 2 kits inside of this box. Of course, I've separated them with the mass production Zaku Thunderbolt version runners here on the right, and the big gun runners here on the left. So, of course, in addition to those, you will be getting, good God, this color-correcting sticker sheet. This is very unfortunate. A ton of gray details here, mostly circles there. You have all of these metallic yellow and black details here for all the thrusters all over the kit. You get some black accents with some silver stripes in the middle there. You get some pink sensor stickers here. Those two are pretty much the only ones I would expect to see and don't fault this kit for. The rest of this is kind of rough. The thrusters, kind of expected for a high grade to not have color accurate thrusters, but with how many there are on this kit, it's just a bit unfortunate. And of course you get some large gray color correcting stickers here on the top left. Also for the Zaku II, you will get this sheet of marking sticker style decals here. Not much to say other than what I already have. They aren't going to look the greatest on this kit. And then for the big gun, you get, dear God, look at this. Of course, the kind of caution stripe things here that go on the legs are going to be color correcting stickers. Not all that surprised about that. You get some sensors there at the bottom, also not surprised. Some black stripes there, and oh my God, look at all the gray circles. This is insane. And then you also get some lavender, like kind of chunky plus signs up there. But this is going to be a very tedious build. I can feel it. So I'm not exactly looking forward to this one. I'm looking forward to the finished product, just not the build itself. And then, of course, you get your sheet of marking sticker style decals here for the big gun. Not much to say. Already saw it on the painted build. And then, a bit of an elephant in the room. You got your screws and nuts here for the big gun. Again, let me know in the comments if you know of any other modern high grade besides this that uses screws, because this feels like a gigantic anomaly to me, but we will see. So, getting into the runners themselves. So starting with the runners for the Zaku II Gundam Thunderbolt version here. These runners were printed in January of 2025. Of course, being a bit of an older kit, this is going to be using polycaps here, using PC001 for a set of standard 1/144th scale polycap joints. Runner A here from the Zaku Thunderbolt version from 2013 is going to be a number of armor parts here in the standard Zaku Army Green that this kit uses as its main color tone. Of course, there's going to be parts for the arms, legs, shoulder shield, waist, etc. Runner B1 in the same lighter tone of army green. Going to be the rest of the armor parts here for parts for the head, hands, shoulders, feet, etc. Runner C1 going to be the main accent tone for the armor here in this darker, almost olive green for parts for the skirts, lower torso, and the sides of the chest. Runner C2 going to be some accent parts in black for parts like the elbows, kneecaps, bottoms of the feet, and the center of the chest. Runner D here in a dark primer frame gray. It does look a little bit gunmetal-y, but not fully. This is going to be a number of joint and frame parts. Of course, being from Gundam Thunderbolt, this is going to include a number of odd texturing to replicate the blast bags that this kit's supposed to have covering its entire inner frame. Runners E1 and E2 are going to be one mega runner split in half. So runner E1 here going to be for a number of different accessory parts here. This is going to include parts for your Zaku machine gun, your Zaku bazooka, etc. And runner E2 here, continuing the accessory runners here, going to contain a number of thruster parts, parts for your large backpack, your heat hawk, and your propellant tanks. And lastly, we have runner F here, going to be our power piping runner, again, replicating the blast bag texture that's going to be covering all the power piping on this kit. So that's all the runners for the Zaku II Thunderbolt version. Fairly simple version of the Zaku, but of course that's not all we have in the box. So all of the runners for the big gun just have a B in the front of the runner name. And these are also going to be from 2013. So starting with runners BA1 and BA2, BA2 being a copy of this quadrant of BA1, going to be in this primer gray for a number of parts for all across the big gun here. You see the magazine parts there, you see parts for the barrel, you see the main body with the trigger that the Zaku is going to hold on to, etc. Runners BB1 and BB2, BB2 being a copy of this section of BB1. This is going to, again, contain just a number of different parts for the big gun's body here. You see the main body of the gun here that's going to sit atop the, I guess, like tripod swivel thing, as well as a number of other different, I guess, frame parts for the big gun. Runner BC in this light purple here, going to be the inner parts for the barrel of the big gun. Runner BD1 in clear red, going to be two parts for the sensors that are going to sit in front of the Zaku. And runner BD2 here, for a number of like cap pieces and thruster parts that are going to be going all over the big gun. So a fair amount of runners here, but again, that's because there are essentially two kits inside of this box. So interested to see how it all plays out. Not interested to put all of these stickers on. That's going to be very annoying, but I'll see you after the build. All right, welcome back. Here's the high-grade Thunderbolt mass production Zaku, snap-built, panel lined, and decaled up with the included sticker style decals. Now I have this kit here with just the Zaku itself standing here, none of the equipment mounted onto it, and the big gun will go over in the accessories section. But getting right into the build, this build really feels dated, if I were to use a single word, because it is. This kit is over a decade old, and it's heavily based on the manga Gundam Thunderbolt Zaku, and I don't remember exactly how old that kit is, but it does predate this kit to the point where the sticker sheet is reused from the manga Zaku, I believe, and it does have some extra color correcting stickers that weren't used in this kit. I believe this is mostly, if not entirely, just a reprint of the manga Thunderbolt Zaku. So this feels dated in a lot of ways. The build is exceptionally simple. There's pretty much no inner frame to speak of apart from what is visible. This kit is entirely polycap reliant for its joints. Even the elbows use polycaps in them, as opposed to a lot of even like older high grades, even like if any joint were to not use polycaps, it would be the elbows. This kit has polycap elbows, and that is a bit of an issue stability-wise, because as you probably know from the design, it has a very large backpack. Now, it's not that big a deal when it's just kind of standing there stability-wise without anything mounted to the backpack, but once you mount the weapons onto the underside of the backpack, and especially once you mount the Zaku bazooka onto the propellant tank, then it becomes extremely back heavy and does really struggle to stand up unassisted. So this is a case of the polycap joints like genuinely being a bit of a hindrance to the stability of this model, where in a lot of cases they aren't that big an issue. Now the build is also exceptionally simple, with most parts being two halves sandwiched together with some polycaps in between to link the parts. Now what this leads to is a ton of seam lines, which we'll go over in a moment, but I did not find the build to be that enjoyable. Maybe I've been spoiled with a lot of the 1/144th scale kits I've been building recently being like very good, very modern, very advanced. This kit is really a time capsule to a different era. This does remind me a bit of the Zaku II F2 that I built like forever ago. But while that kit, it wasn't really that big of a deal because it was a fairly basic Zaku design, this kit, again, that very large backpack combined with mounting all the weapons onto it really does serve as a bit of an issue in standing poses in particular. They did limit the articulation of the torso backwards, which helps a bit, but does not entirely alleviate the problem. The build is also very tedious, what with all of these stickers on both this kit and especially the big gun. Now, the majority of stickers are located on the backpack, so most of the tedium is very front-loaded on this kit because you do build the backpack first, as the torso, waist, and backpack are like one big unit that you build together. I have it separated in the time-lapse footage just for like convenience's sake of showing all three separately, but in the build you're supposed to build all three of them together, and the sheer amount of stickers on the backpack is very annoying, but once you get past that hurdle, the rest of the kit is fairly unexceptional. It's just very emblematic of the more simplified, dated high grades that we were seeing around 10-ish years ago and beyond. So before I move on to aesthetics, let's talk about seam lines, because oh boy, there are seam lines galore on both this kit and the big gun. We'll talk about the big gun in the accessories section. So first off, the kind of big Zaku seam line that a lot of even modern Zakus struggle with today with the forearm is present here. It's kind of hard to see. Also, the hand is very loose in the polycap wrist. It pops off extremely easily when you articulate the arm, so just something to be aware of if you decide to get this kit. But as you can see here, the seam line is present running down the front of the forearm. There is also a mold line running down the center of the, I get what's supposed to be like a blast bag covering the inner frame here in the bicep, and the seam line running down the bottom of the blast bag in the elbow. The seam line also runs down the back of the forearm as well, which is very annoying. There's a seam line running down the middle of the shoulder. This spike is part separated, so it does not run through the spike, but it is running entirely through the shoulder. In the legs then, there's of course a seam line running down the side of the thigh here on the side of the power piping. On the inside edge, it is disguised a little bit as a panel line, but is still a little annoying to look at. And in the lower legs then, there is a 3-section structure to it, a front and 2 halves, which means that there is a pretty bad seam line on the back of the legs. Now, this is normally disguised as a panel line in more modern Zakus, but here it is fully present. In the backpack then, there are also plenty of seam lines in what are supposed to be the subarms up here. There are seam lines cutting them in half where the two have sandwiched together. There's a seam line in the propellant tank where the decals are supposed to go over. There's a seam line separating the 2 halves of the propellant tank here. And in the accessories, as is typical for high grades, in both of the weapons there's a seam line kind of running down the middle where the 2 halves sandwiched together on both the Zaku machine gun and the Zaku bazooka. There's a pretty significant seam line just kind of running down the middle of the entire weapon there. So overall, seam lines are extremely poor with this kit. It really feels dated in that aspect, and if it bothers you, there's going to be a lot of cleanup you're going to have to do with this kit to get rid of all of the seam lines. Now, in terms of aesthetics, this kit is actually the first kind of plain green grunt Zaku I've ever built. All the Zakus I've built have been not in the iconic shade of Zaku green. The most basic one I've built was the Zaku II F2 from I think 2013 in the EFSF color, so that was in like more beige. But this kit, I actually do really like the more muted color scheme that the Thunderbolt Zaku takes, with the very dull two-tone green thing going on with black accents breaking it all up. Now, aesthetically, let's get into the elephant in the room. The backpack, which is horrifically color inaccurate. Now, the main mobile suit itself, including the backpack, does manage to avoid a lot of parts that you do need to paint in yourself. Of course, there are some details that you will have to paint in. The big gun is much worse in that aspect, but we'll talk about that in the accessories section. So, getting into the color correcting stickers, there are an absolute ton of them, like you saw in the unboxing. This color correcting sticker sheet is massive. Most of these stickers are going to be in the backpack, and of course there are these 2 stickers down here that you don't use that I believe were used in the manga version of the Gundam Thunderbolt Zaku. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but we'll go over the color correcting stickers now quickly before I go over the parts that you need to paint in yourself. So sticker 1 is going to be this wraparound gray sticker here on near the bottom of the propellant tank. Sticker 2, you get 2 of. They're going to be these gray detail stripes running down the backpack here where the subarms mount. Stickers 3, 4, 5, and 6 are all unused on this kit. Stickers 7 and 8 are going to be pink circular metallic sticker details. Sticker 8 is going to be the camera in the Zaku bazooka here. I don't know how you can see that, but there's a metallic green sticker where the scope is supposed to be. And sticker 7 is going to be the metallic pink sticker here for the mono eye. I forgot to mention this when I was talking about the stability of the kit, but I don't know what it is, but the mono eye part in my kit is very loose. It does tend to just articulate itself as I'm moving the head around. So it's easy enough to articulate, just it's a little bit loose in my kit. I don't know if it's an issue with my kit or if it's an issue with this design in general. Stickers 9 and 10 are going to be these joint cap stickers here for black with a silver stripe going through it for the elbows and the knees here. Sticker 11 and 12 you get an absolute ton of. Sticker 11 is going to be the gold subthruster details here on the outside and inside of the lower leg sections. All of these little details here are stickers, unfortunately. And sticker 12 you get a ton of. They're going to be the gold subthruster details all over the backpack here. The backpack is, of course, entirely in gray. And then stickers 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17 you get an absolute ton of. They're going to be all of the light gray accent parts for that are supposed to be, I believe, the joints and the subarms that are supposed to articulate. And unfortunately, in the high grade, these subarms do not articulate. They're just kind of here. But all of these gray parts here are color correcting stickers, very tedious to put on. Now for parts on the base mobile suit itself that aren't color accurate and you don't get color correcting stickers for, they're pretty much entirely going to be localized in the backpack. So there are two major ones. Of course, first, all of the thrusters in the backpack are just gray on the runner. They need to be painted in gold. I used an EX yellow gold Gundam marker, and I do think it looks pretty good as far as the end result goes, and it's definitely something I recommend you paint in. The other major one, which I don't think is that big a deal, but I did paint in, is going to be the base of the propellant tank. Of course, the propellant tank is just two halves that sandwiched together, and the entire thing is in this primer gray. The base is supposed to be in a lighter gray, so I used the light blue from the MSV marker set, which it says it's blue, but it's an extremely light gray with a slight blue tint to it, so I think that color does work really nicely as an accent color on this kit. I think it came out pretty good. And of course, talking about the decal stickers all across this kit, they don't look that great because, one, they're fairly old, so this is kind of like the real grade style of stickers where the borders are pretty obnoxious. They try to cut them to match the contour of the part that they're on, but as you can see here with the darker color scheme of the mass production Zaku, like here on the skirts and there on the torso, they are extremely noticeable. On the lighter green parts, like here on the shoulder, they're a little less noticeable, but it's still pretty bad, and honestly, I'd recommend that you avoid most of the stickers on this kit. Maybe the larger ones for like the big Xeon logo here and maybe the one in the chest you can use, but all of these marking stickers and stripe details and stuff, I really am not the biggest fan of the look of them. Now for a quick size and visual comparison, here is the high-grade mass production Thunderbolt Zaku right next to two kind of normal Zakus. We have the Zaku II Solari over here and the Desert Zaku Pink Panther Forces over here. So as you can see, this stands a little bit shorter than both of them. This does appear to be accurate to the 17.5 meter tall height that the Zaku traditionally has. These two Zakus here, they tweak the proportions a little bit. Well, the Zaku Solari is taller in general, but the Desert Zaku and the Origin Zakus in general, they did tweak the proportions of them to make them slightly taller than they should be. They're in line with what the average, kind of high-grade height 18 meter tall Gundam is. The Zaku II Thunderbolt here is going to be a little bit shorter, so the mobile suit itself would take up a little bit less space on your shelf were it not for the gigantic backpack and, of course, the big gun, which we'll get into in a moment. So, of course, for accessories, apart from the big gun, which we'll talk about separately in a moment, this is the high-grade mass production Zaku Thunderbolt with everything it comes with. Starting as usual with the hand options, you'll be getting actually plenty of hand options with this kit, although most of them do pretty much the same thing. You will, of course, get your standard holding hands for both the right and the left side here. You will get a closed fist only for the left side, unfortunately, and then you will get 3 different trigger fingers, one for each side and then one specifically for the right hand. So, of course, the ones for each side will have a bent wrist here. I believe this is specifically, the manual says this is specifically to be used with the Zaku machine gun for more natural kind of holding poses, but the only difference between these trigger fingers and the one specifically for the right side are the bent wrist, as you can see there by the ball at the end. And of course, here's the trigger finger specifically for the right side. As you can see, this has a standard straight wrist. I believe this is also used when you have this kit mounting the big gun, but we'll see when I actually pose it. For adapters then, you will get 2 different adapters. You will get this adapter here. These clips will mount onto the lower rungs here of the backpack, and this is for mounting both the Heat Hawk and the Zaku machine gun onto the backpack. This little clip here will clip onto the handle of the Heat Hawk, and this tab here will clip into the slot on the side of the Zaku machine gun, and this will just kind of dangle out off the bottom of the backpack. Now, while this does make the kit a little bit more back heavy, it is nothing compared to this adapter here, which is for the Zaku bazooka. So the inside of this has a little tab, as you can see, and that will clip onto this slot here on the propellant tank, and the Zaku bazooka will just slot into the tab on the top with this little hole by the magazine. So this actually does weigh the mass production Zaku back quite a bit, and it will tip over extremely easily when you have the Zaku bazooka on it. Now, as for your armaments for the Zaku, of course you will be getting your heat hawk here. You only get one. No, you don't get two for one deployed, one stored. And of course the edge is not color accurate. It will need to be painted in. I think the manual uses like a metallic, like very like yellow hot metal kind of color. I use metallic orange here and I think it looks fine. This is pretty unremarkable. It's just your standard heat hawk. You will of course get your Zaku machine gun here. Not much to say. This is about as typical as Zaku machine guns go. Really the only major difference between this and your typical Zaku machine gun is the slot here for mounting it onto the adapter that goes on the underside of the backpack. But apart from that, all your usual Zaku stuff. The scope can be moved from side to side. Secondary handle can pop out for two-handed wielding. The magazine is removable, but it doesn't look good without the magazine. There's nowhere to mount the magazine, so there's no real reason to take it off. So all in all, just your very typical Zaku machine gun here. And then of course you get your Zaku bazooka, which is slightly different with the magazine mounting onto the side here. But apart from that, it is your typical Zaku bazooka. You have a secondary handle that can pop out to the side. The main handle can kind of swing downwards for more natural gripping over the shoulder. And of course your secondary scope can move from side to side. The magazine is removable, but again, there's nowhere to mount the magazine separately, so there's no real reason to do it. And the pegs on the bazooka look a little bit unsightly when the magazine is off. So again, while you can remove the magazine, there's no real reason to do it. So overall, a pretty complete accessory spread for a Zaku II, but there's one more thing to address in the room. Let's address the elephant, or rather the gun in the room. Here is the big gun, and as you can see, it is quite massive. The Zaku II is, of course, going to be dwarfed by the big gun in length, and it does take up a ton of space. I need to kind of jury-rig together a stand extender for my rotating base to get this spinning on it, but you'll see that later. Of course, the big gun is the main reason to get this bundle. This is a gigantic weapon. Unfortunately, though, the build is exceptionally tedious. I didn't film any footage for it because the vast majority of the build is going to be applying stickers. And we'll go over those now really quickly before I talk about seam lines. Look at this. This is insane, the sheer amount of stickers on them. And most of them are for like the same details, being the very similar kind of circular light gray details that you saw on the subarms of the base Zaku II. So going over the stickers really quickly, stickers 1 and 2 are going to be black void details for the inside of this frame part for the barrel, of course, for both sides. Stickers 3 and 4 are going to be these caution stripes all over the bottom of the legs here on the big gun. Stickers 5 and 6 are going to be pink metallic details, one circle for this side and one rectangle for the front of the, I guess, scope there, with these two clear red camera parts being part separated. Sticker 7 is going to be, you get a ton of, they're going to be all of these light lavender gray details here on the tops of these, I don't know what they are, magazines, e-packs, these very large, I think battery units maybe for the big gun. So all of these light gray lavender parts are fold over stickers that don't look all that great. And stickers 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16 are going to be all of the light gray circles all over the big gun. As you can see there, extremely tedious, really didn't like that. Now the build in general you could classify as tedious. Now you need to build the legs 3 different times because of course the legs are going to be on a tripod, and honestly the most tedious part of it was placing all of these little thrusters here all over these little propellant tanks on the legs. Now these are also a major loss risk. How do I know? As you can see there, one thruster is missing from the bottom of the tank. There's an empty slot here. While you're handling the legs, the thrusters just tend to pop out. It is very annoying. One flip down onto the carpet. I could not find it after a pretty long time of searching, so I just gave up, and luckily it's on the bottom. Here's where it will probably not be noticed, except by you right now. The big gun itself is actually surprisingly simple, with the main base just being 2 halves that sandwiched together, the barrel itself being 3 parts that sandwiched together, and this inner barrel here also being 3 parts that sandwiched together. So in general, the build is exceptionally simple, but also very tedious at the same time, especially with the stickers, and the gun really does live up to its reputation of being horrifically color inaccurate. But before we get to that, quickly talking about seam lines, each of the legs is going to have a gigantic seam line running down the middle of the leg here where the 2 halves sandwiched together. Same thing with these propellant tanks, kind of seam lines running down the middle there if the camera will focus. As you can see, there's seam line running down the middle of the propellant tank. So those are all the big seam lines, but getting to the parts of this kit that are color inaccurate. So every single bit of green you see here, I painted in myself. This kit is largely just kind of gray on the runner, where it's supposed to have a number of kind of faint dark green accents all across this kit. I used the dark green from the MSV Gundam marker set, and that seemed to be fine as a kind of It's more subtle in person as far as accents go. On camera, it is pretty bright, especially this part on the barrel here. I think it might just be the light shining on it, but in person, it is fairly subtle and does look pretty good once you paint everything in. And this color scheme is, of course, much more darker and muted compared to the manga version of the big gun. Quickly getting into articulation then, of course, the legs can articulate at 2 points, one in the base and one at the end here for the feet to rotate, so you can adjust the height of the big gun. Of course, this is going to be using screws. If I take off the cap here, you can see the screw and nut in the leg there. Each leg houses 2 screws and 2 nuts, and they do a pretty good job of holding the leg pretty tightly. I was a little bit skeptical, but this really does need the screws. Before you put the screws in, the leg is remarkably loose. In addition, the gun can, of course, rotate about the base as necessary, and the secondary handle here can swing down and swivel out at 2 points of articulation. So in general, the big gun is horrifically color inaccurate and is really only there for, guys, the spectacle and size of it. If you want this to be color accurate, you need to be prepared to do a lot of painting. Also, one part I forgot to mention, all of these little like warning lights here, all of the yellow here, I used the MSV Darky Yellow Gundam marker for, because they are just gray on the runner and they need to be yellow. That was one part I forgot to mention earlier. So yeah, unfortunately, the big gun is incredibly color inaccurate and does need a lot of work to be color accurate. So getting into articulation of the Zaku itself, starting with the head as per usual. So of course, being a pretty much entirely polycap based build, if you've built any Zaku that uses polycaps, you should be pretty familiar with the articulation. So starting in the head, of course, the polycap ball joint will allow for a fairly nice look up, actually. A very mediocre look down. This isn't all that great. You get pretty much no side to side tilt. The head can 360 about the ball joint very easily, and of course the mono eye can swivel. If I get my hobby knife here, like I mentioned earlier, the mono eye is incredibly loose. As you can see, it's very easy to just kind of move around, but you can get a fairly minor pivot to either side there. Yeah, maybe at most 15 degrees or so to either side. This is one of the worst mono eye articulations I've seen in this Zaku Palooza event, unfortunately. Just another part of this kit that feels very dated. In the arms then, of course, you will get a shoulder swing forward of under 45 degrees. The spike shoulder can articulate independently of the arm to allow for just under a 90-degree side raise. The arm can 360 about the peg. You get full rotation in the upper bicep. Yep, there goes that hand, very loose in the polycap wrist, like I mentioned earlier. A single joint in the elbow will give you just over 90 degrees, very disappointing. And of course, the polycap ball joint in the wrist will do ball joint things, but the hand does tend to pop out of the wrist incredibly easily. The shoulder shield here, which is a bit more widely proportioned than a normal Zaku shoulder shield, can do the typical shoulder shield things of spinning around and pivoting, although the ball joint is noticeably more shallow than the other shoulder shields I've taken a look at for these Zakus that have polycaps, so the articulation is a little bit limited compared to those. In the torso then, for ab crunch, you get basically nothing forward, and you get a slight ab crunch backwards, which is a little unfortunate because of how heavy this backpack is, especially with all the stuff loaded onto it. Speaking of the backpack, of course, these subarms are non-functional, unfortunately. They do not do anything, they're just there for show. No articulation in the thrusters. The only real articulation is going to be this propellant tank, which is on a polycap ball joint, which will do ball joint things. Unfortunately, as you can see, the propellant tank can't really be articulated, it just kind of drops down like so. In the waist then, your front skirts will be able to flip up just over 90 degrees. Your side skirts will be able to flip out maybe 15 degrees, and your back skirt is fixed in place. In the hips then, you do have a bit of a hip swing mechanism where one leg can pivot forward, the other leg can pivot back, like so. For kicks, your front kick will get just about 90 degrees, your side kick will get just about 45 degrees, and your rear kick will get maybe 30 degrees. So overall, your articulation for your kicks are going to be pretty underwhelming. You will, of course, get full 360 rotation in the upper thigh. A single bend in the knee will only get you about 90 degrees of bend. And in the feet, then, you will, of course, not get any toe separation there with some hollow spaces on the bottom of the feet. For a toe dip, you will get a very minor toe dip. An okay toe upward raise, you'll get some minor side to side. And for foot pivot, you can pivot a full 45 degrees to either side, which is good. So overall, articulation is very underwhelming on this kit. The single bend in the elbows and knees is particularly disappointing, but with this set in particular, I don't think you'll be posing your Zaku doing anything crazy. Speaking of posing, let's see the articulation in action and some poses. So getting the high-grade Thunderbolt Zaku into a bit of a running and gunning pose here and a spin, and first off, very surprised they can even pull off this running and gunning pose. I was confident I could pull it off without anything mounted to the backpack because of how stable it was, especially with the Zaku Bazooka mounted onto the propellant tank there. I'm very surprised they could pull this off. Now, this pose does look pretty bad with this kit, especially because as with all Thunderbolt kits, all of those thrusters and stuff, the large backpack, the very kind of space-oriented designs of all of these kits, they look at their best in the air, or at least if you're going to have a standing in like a diorama where you have it standing on like an asteroid or a piece of debris or something, just kind of running on the ground here, this looks pretty awful. In addition, the poor ankle articulation does mean that the leg that the kit is actually balancing on is pretty much just straight down on the ground, which does look pretty bad. I've said this with a lot of other kits, but poor ankle articulation means you can't really throw the leg forward, and that means that these kinds of running poses look pretty unnatural. At best, this looks like a bit of a trot, and again, because of the design of the Thunderbolt Zaku here being incredibly obviously space-oriented, having it on the ground this kind of pose is really not conducive to what this kit's aesthetic design really lends itself towards. This looks a little bit awkward. Actually getting the kit to hold the Zaku machine gun though is pretty okay. The bent wrist does make the aiming of the Zaku machine gun look a little bit awkward at certain angles, but for the most part it is fine and it looks okay one-handed. Although of course we prefer to have it two-handed or something, as is the case with a lot of other Zaku machine guns. Just the general overall design of it really lends itself towards that two-handed grip, just to convey the power of the weapon that it needs the second hand for more stable firing to kind of restrain the recoil. So in general I really wouldn't consider having this kit doing this pose. It's really not what the design language of this kit lends itself towards. So of course, as per usual, to cover all of my bases, here is the kit in a crouching pose firing the Zaku Bazooka over the shoulder. Now, this really shows off what I was saying earlier, that this kit looks pretty horrible on the ground. While this pose could look good in a lot of kits, and I think the Zaku Bazooka in general would lend itself quite well to having it like kind of mounted on the shoulder with a second hand to kind of, again, stabilize the weapon, show off its power. On this kit, it's pretty bad, namely because of the design of the Zaku Bazooka. That side magazine jutting out really just tends to collide with things. In particular, the wider shoulder shield on the right shoulder really doesn't cooperate with that kind of magazine. I had to get it in this pretty extreme angle that looks really bad in the right hand in order to actually get it onto the shoulder. I don't think it would be much better on the left shoulder, one, because, well, you couldn't grip the secondary handle with the right shoulder just because of the way it articulates, and two, I think the spikes would similarly get in the way of the magazine on the side quite a bit. In addition, this kit really can't crouch all that well. The lack of any kind of hip drop and the single bend in the knee really limits the kind of articulation you get in the legs. So as you can see, the lower leg is kind of floating there and tilted to the side. That was the only way I could get it balanced in a crouching pose, so it looks pretty horrible. The Zaku Bazooka, however, does lend itself quite well to being held in one hand kind of under the armpit, as you'll see in the next pose. But in this kind of pose here, it does look pretty bad. In addition, the loose wrists that I mentioned earlier was a very big detriment in terms of getting this kit to do anything two-handed. You'll see that with the big gun later. But every time I was trying to pose this, the wrists would just keep kind of popping out because of the way you have to bend the right wrist to get it even in this kind of pose to begin with. So I would definitely not consider doing anything like this on the shelf. So getting the kit into the air, replicating one of the promo images from inside the manual, here's the Thunderbolt Zaku kind of flying through the air with the Zaku machine gun in one hand, the Zaku Bazooka tucked under the armpit in the left hand, just kind of firing off at a couple of different targets. And if you're going to pose this kit separately from the big gun, this is probably the pose I would use. It really shows off what this kit is good at. One, because it's kind of a brick and doesn't pose very well, just having it in a basic flying forward pose really does work. In addition, again, this kit's very spacefaring design really does lend itself to being in the air. This looks a lot more natural than any ground pose you could have this kit in, besides maybe mounting the big gun. And three, of course, with the Zaku Bazooka tucked underneath the arm in this bit of a tilted pose, it actually looks very natural firing the Zaku Bazooka there underneath the armpit. It looks stable, it looks good, and it lacks any of the awkward kind of wrist bend that the two-handed pose over the shoulder had. My only real gripe with this kind of pose is, as you can see, it is tilting a little bit to the left. I don't exactly know what the issue is. None of the other kits I've tried on this action base actually does this. It was just this kit that was like tilting a little bit oddly. I think it comes down to the 3mm hole in the bottom of the kit in the kind of taint area being just a tad too tight. So the adapter that normally works with pretty much any high grade with that 3mm hole really struggled to get in there, and I think it tilted a little bit as a result. So if you get this kit, maybe just re-drill out to the mounting hole for the action base with a pin vise or something, just a 3mm pin vise, and I think it should be fine then. As it is, by default, I don't know if it was an issue with my specific kit or if it's just an issue with this design in general. The adapter was a bit tight and didn't fit in there properly, which I think led to a bit of tilting. But once you resolve that issue, once you get it fully aligned with the action base, I do think it really looks good in this pose, and if you pose this kit separately from the big gun, this is pretty much the only thing I would have it doing. Now for the big gun. So originally I was going to have two poses with the big gun, one of the kit on the ground and one in the air. Well, on the ground, as you can see, the legs of the big gun are quite wide and they would not fit on my spinning base. I tried to use a couple of different things to kind of extend out the base to have it fit, but it just wouldn't work. So you're going to have to make do with these still images here. I'll have an actual rotating video of the kit in the air because the legs are a bit more compact in terms of the diameter of the circle they make on the ground. So I'll have a video of that when I talk about the conclusion, but for now you have to make do with still images. So the big gun is incredibly impressive. Unfortunately, it is a gigantic pain to actually pose the Zaku holding onto the big gun. Now, there were a couple of issues, namely in the wrists. Like I mentioned earlier, the loose wrists are a massive detriment to this kit, and because of the two-handed, very specific angles you need the Zaku to actually grip onto the big gun with, because of how granular the adjustment for the height of the big gun is, it was very easy to get it slightly out of alignment, which would pop the wrists out. Then you have to realign everything and pop the wrist back in, and then while you're aligning the Zaku, you might jostle it a little bit too much, and the adapters to mount the weapons onto the backpack might slip. So the Zaku machine gun would pop out very frequently because it would bump against the propellant tank, and then when I'm trying to put that back on, I would jostle the propellant tank and the Zaku bazooka would fall off, and it was just a whole mess. It was incredibly awkward to get it into this pose, although I do think the end result is kind of worth it. It is definitely an impressive and unique display, though maybe I would have another kit hold on to the big gun over the Thunderbolt Zaku just because of how awkward it is, how bad the wrists are, and how much of a pain it was to even get it into this pose. So definitely something that I think a lot of people will pose this set doing on the shelf. Again, you're buying this set with the big gun, you're probably going to want to pose this kit with the big gun. So if you're going to pose this kit with the big gun, just keep in mind it is an incredible pain to get into this pose. Be prepared for a lot of things to fall off, and just be patient when you're getting it into the pose. So in conclusion, the Thunderbolt Zaku and big gun set definitely is a very dated set, but it does have a lot of unique value. In terms of the build, this kit is, again, incredibly dated. It definitely feels like an over-decade-old high grade because it is. Many of the parts in this kit lack an inner frame. Pretty much all you see is all you get, with the kind of blast bag material wrapping around what should be the frame on the arms and legs. In addition, most of the parts are just two halves sandwiched together with some polycaps linking all the parts together, which makes the kit feel a little bit loose and floppy, particularly with that large backpack there, especially if you have all of the weapons mounted onto the backpack. It gives this kit a lot of issues just standing up in terms of stability because it just keeps pulling the torso back and it wants to fall over. So the build is not great. In addition, I forgot to mention this earlier, but the power piping does require you to kink it in several places, going from the torso into the backpack, and even after you kink it, with the way everything is laid out, those bends where you're supposed to kink it kind of undo themselves a little bit, so you do have these really awkward looking divots in the piping when you put it into the backpack. So it just does not look all that natural in general. In terms of aesthetics then, this is really where this kit kind of falls flat a little bit, particularly in the realm of seam lines. This kit is covered in seam lines on both sides of the forearms, on the left spike shoulder, on the thighs, on the backs of the legs, a lot on the backpack, on the fake subarms, on the propellant tank, on the bazooka, etc., etc. On the big gun, there are also a ton of seam lines. There's just a lot of cleanup you're going to have to do to make this kit look its best. In addition, outside of the very unique sculpt, the color accuracy leaves much to be desired. The thrusters in the backpack need to be painted in gold. The base of the propellant tank going into the backpack needs to be painted in light gray. The heat hawk blade needs to be painted in metallic orange or like a bright yellow, and the big gun lives up to its reputation of being horrifically color inaccurate. Many parts of the big gun need to be painted in a dark army green or a drab green for like the accent colors on things like the, I don't know exactly what they are, the e-packs, the batteries, whatever they are, providing the big gun power on the tops and bottoms, on the barrel of the big gun, on the disc that the big gun uses as a base. All of it needs to be painted in that kind of dark green accent color, which really adds to the amount of work you're going to do with this kit, combined with the seam lines, and really makes this kit feel like a chore to work with. However, the end result may be worth it to you, because this kit, as with many other Thunderbolt kits, has an incredibly unique aesthetic. The base Zaku mobile suit itself is relatively unchanged, with a bit of a muted color palette, but the large backpack with everything mounted onto it gives it a bit of an impressive silhouette. Unfortunately, though, it's not entirely functional, with the subarms being just two half sandwiched together for show. They do not open or extend, and you cannot pose this kit kind of with the subarms handing the weapons over to the mobile suit. But the end result you get once you paint everything in, if you clean everything up, is quite an impressive of display that I think is nearly centerpiece worthy. It's definitely an invaluable part to any kind of Thunderbolt diorama you would want to make. It would look incredibly impressive if you make like a base that's like a piece of like debris from a broken battleship or something that you can have it rest on. That would look incredibly nice, and I think the big gun in particular is incredible diorama material that you can do a lot of great things with. In terms of accessories then, this kit comes with pretty much everything you expect it to except for hand options. While it does come with quite a few hand options, a lot of them are pretty much the same thing, just trigger fingers. It would really be nice to have some kind of open expressive hand or closed fist for both sides, so those missing hand options are a little bit odd. For articulation, this kit leaves a lot to be desired. It feels incredibly dated even for when it came out. I remember building a few kits from around that time and they at least had double bends in the elbows and knees. This kit really does struggle with that, having a single bend in both the elbows and knees that look pretty bad because of the way the blast type material just kind of ends in the elbow. One looks bad, and two is not capable of doing all that much. This kit looks pretty bad on the ground. The lack of kind of lower body articulation means you're very limited in the kinds of standing poses you would want to do. The lack of an elbow bend means in terms of your firing poses, if you have this kit separate from the big gun, you're also incredibly limited with what you would want to do. In addition, the hole for mounting an action base is a little bit tight for this kit, which means that this kit does tend to tilt itself on the action base a little bit. It may be difficult to get this kit on and off the base if you don't kind of widen the hole a little bit with a pin vise or something. So would I recommend this kit? Honestly, unless you want to make a diorama with the big gun or something and you are prepared for the amount of work that needs to go into this kit to make it like look good, no, not really. This kit is very expensive, being for a high grade, being around $45 because, well, you're buying basically two kits in one, but for that price you can get a number of very quality master grades. And honestly, if you're going to get like a unique Thunderbolt kit, I would just recommend the high grade full armor Thunderbolt Gundam or the Psycho Zaku, or if you could find it like the Thunderbolt Ground Gundam or something. I know it has been reprinted in a while, but if it does get reprinted, that kit would be a bit more of a unique value proposition to your collection. As it is right now, this kit just really feels like more trouble than it's worth, but the incredible uniqueness of the big gun itself may warrant some people to buy it for the sake of dioramas. So that was my review of the high grade Thunderbolt Zaku and Big Gun set. What do you think of this kit? Let me know in the comments below. If you like reviews like these, make sure to sub and hit the notification bell. If you like this video, give it a like, and I'll see you next time with my review of the Master Grade Gundam TR1 Hazel Custom. I'll see you then.